Good afternoon, I suppose we have. Yes, good afternoon. I've been asked to talk for about 20 minutes or 25 minutes and then let you all split off into your groups and come back with some really devastating questions for me. So that's what I'm going to do. Why the database state? Well, it all goes back to the... Someone's going to have to show me how to move this on. Enter. Yes, there we are. Well, it's shocking early in the afternoon, but when we first started our campaign against the identity card back in 2004, it occurred to me very early on that the problem with the identity cards legislation was not the identity card. The problem was that the identity card itself was being used as a pretext to build a national identity register, would be a record of everybody in the entire country. The problem was not the card, it was the database. And so the database state is the phrase that we coined to cover that eventuality, that the card would be discarded, but the progress towards building a national database on which everybody would be recorded, on which all government services would be centralised, would carry on. For some reason, the last administration was stupid, and they never ever did that. However, that doesn't mean that the database state itself has gone fail, because the more we dug into it, the more we discovered that there was not just one gigantic national database project in the country. There were dozens. Every department had its own cherished database on which all or a very large proportion of the population was to be recorded, from which all or a very large proportion of the population was to be directly governed, and between which information would be exchanged from department to department, from department to sub-agency, and from agencies back to departments. It had become a dream in Whitehall that information could be gathered on all of us and used to manage the processes of government ever so much better. It's not a new idea, but it's a recension of an old idea, really. We have had, since time immemorial, departments of state that wish to plan for the future. When the wall came down in 1989, the idea of centrally planned economies was discredited. Nobody these days, very few people these days, put forward the idea that government should tell firms what to produce, in how much quantity, and where it should be delivered. We don't have direction of labour like we did in the 1940s, where the state will tell you what job you should have. All that economic planning has largely vanished from the lexicon of government, but planning itself hasn't. What's tended to happen is that planning has shifted from being a matter of the economy no longer is seen as plannable, to all of our lives. The fashion in Whitehall is to gather more and more information in order to tell us what to do. And this ties up somewhat with nudging in the last session. In order to nudge us correctly, the idea is that rational planners will gather information about what we're up to and find one way or another of persuading us to stop. So, I don't know if there's anybody here from Scotland? Yes. Have you, sir, a young Scot card?
I did have you.
You did have a young. But this is actually an old Scot card, but it's precisely the same thing. The Scottish government, as they now are, the Scots Nationalist Party, were incredibly against the idea of a national UK identity card. However, that didn't stop them introducing a Scottish national identity scheme. Because if it's Scottish, it's okay. If it emanates from Whitehall, it's not quite the same thing. The Scottish scheme is rather more developed than the Whitehall scheme ever got to be. And it acts as an armature for all sorts of information to be shared about you. Here's a little model of the information that is structured by the Scots citizen account. Little bits of information find their way in, connected to cross-index, all these different pieces. This is actually from a slide that was produced for the Scots government and also for the Department of Work and Pensions, discussing how their information systems would be linked in. So this is how government sees you. You are a file. You are a collection of information which is connected to your personal address, your surname, and your date of birth. And that information can be added to and cross-referenced and cross-linked in the ideal model to provide a full picture of what the citizen is. We've got an older way of doing that. It's called the census. Now, you're actually told that the census is about collecting information about the population every 10 years. We need you to take part so that the services in your area, like schools, hospitals, housing, roads and emergency services, can be planned and funded for the future. That sort of collective aggregate information has been available for a long time. What we are told is that the census information will be confidential for 100 years and only aggregates will ever be used. That situation has somewhat been complicated recently because there are now data sharing powers that would enable access to personal census information, about which I won't bore you. But they came in very recently in the Statistics and Registration Services Act, so you can look them up if you like. But the idea of planning has certainly not gone away. In the case of census planning, we have absolute cast iron evidence that it doesn't, neither does it work, nor is it used. I see no planning of services for the 370,000 Jedi discovered at the last census. Local authorities complain deeply that the last census failed to capture any of the 500,000 to 1 million Eastern and Central European immigrants in the last decade who were moving into particular areas and using their services. The census is a very, very crude tool, but the database state is envisaged as a very, very refined tool. The idea is that the more information that can be accumulated, the better the decisions that can be taken are. It's a testing to destruction of the idea of planning, and also of an individualised state. Because this is not about how we will treat people in general. Identification is seen as the means to get to supervision. It's like that. The more we know about you, the more we can help you live your life better, whether you like it or not. And what's more, we can also plan society better. That presumes a whole lot of things. It presumes an idea that by identifying people, you are better able to supervise them. It is better to know who somebody is in order to check their age, than it is merely to check their age. You can find out about society by accumulating vast masses of data. There's an intelligence paradigm going around. If only we collect vast quantities of information about people's travel and their movements,